There are all kinds of reasons why the most extreme forms of jazz feel so unapproachable, but I'd argue that the uninitiated listener's biggest barrier to entry comes from a general lack of emphasis on thematic continuity. Of course, a lot of jazz pieces include a central chorus, a riff which the band returns to repeatedly throughout the track, and these choruses, unsurprisingly, oftentimes become some of the most iconic moments in the entire genre. However, jazz soloists often depart so radically from this central theme as to render it untraceable for the vast majority of the song. Of course, we as an audience aren't owed music that appeals to our most basic tastes and impulses, but it's natural to wonder what such a highly technical genre could do with a more relaxed, approachable style. Our questions find an answer on Saxophone Colossus by Sonny Rollins, the foremost example of the streamlined, simplified hard bop style in its most thematically unified, temperamentally approachable form. As we discussed in the last episode about Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, hard bop took all of the manic energy of bebop and trimmed off some of the ornamental maximalism, simplifying chords, shortening solos, and expanding choruses. Here, we get all those same alterations, combined with an ironclad dedication to thematic integrity, with every note of every solo going towards the ambition of creating a unified song. This doesn't necessarily mean quoting the chorus all the time, or playing variations on the exact same riffs. Rollins opts to impose certain restrictions on his own improvisation in each solo, and oftentimes this means staying within a narrower range of notes. You can see this on St. Thomas, a landmark in the reintroduction of Latin rhythms to jazz. Notably, those rhythms are highly visible in the chorus, the backgrounds, and the solos. In this instance, Rollins does limit the range of notes in his arsenal, but he also crucially returns to those same underlying rhythmic themes. And while he doesn't play the same rhythm every time, every rhythm he does play is identifiably connected back to that Caribbean origin. Rather than throwing us a wicked fastball of pure energy, the type of emotional explosion which makes a lot of types of jazz compelling in their own right, Rollins instead opts to tell a musical story. The story in the case of this album mostly feels quite cheery, acting more as a family-friendly fantasy tale than any sort of romance or thriller. An air of innocence pulls through the generally sunshiny chord progressions, and the light, playful, percussive tone of each soloist. Despite the album's light-hearted outer appearance, however, darker currents may lurk underneath. The album includes a track Moritat from the experimental German jazz musical Threepenny Opera, a track which was originally used by the play to introduce its anti-hero protagonist. Threepenny Opera sits within that era of frantic anti-fascist German art from the 1920s and 1930s, and the play fittingly uses a character study to critique capitalism, imperialism, and fascism. I'd recommend you experience the play for yourself. It's fairly short and was designed to be consumed by audiences who don't normally have an interest in musical theater. And of course, you know, because our current time in history, yada yada, you get what I'm trying to say here. Suffice to say, the main character, named Mac the Knife, embodies just about as much inner darkness as a quasi-sympathetic protagonist possibly could. Like if you rewrote A Clockwork Orange with all the German brutality of the Brothers Grimm. Just like with Saxophone Colossus, Threepenny Opera plays with that same sense of whimsy. In the play's case, to draw out our sympathies for the objectively misanthropic sociopath in Mac the Knife. This makes us wonder, what exactly are we being lulled into on Saxophone Colossus? What exactly happens in this wordless story that we uncritically bop our heads to decades later? Like we talked about with Monin, the intense energy of New York City lives on this record despite its uplifting tone. Tempos remain high, and flourishes on some of the solos on some of the album's deep cuts harken back to that intensity that comes from straight bebop. And Rollins delivers even the most thematically straightforward elements on this record with a sort of jittery energy. It's as if he's biting at the bit to just unleash that bebop madness at any given moment. And believe it or not, it is possible to have a good day in New York. But that good day doesn't have the exact same look or feel as a good day high in the mountains or on an empty beach. The first time Julia and I went to New York together, we had an awesome time walking around Central Park on that first nice day of spring. And we got to see that East Coast euphoria of the world opening up for the beginning of the spring season. However, we saw 3 different fistfights that day, and none of them were particularly serious, but still, the city can throw a lot at you, especially if it's not something you're used to. Sonny Rollins portrays exactly that type of positivity. The feeling of strolling down the street on a Sunday morning, of taking the subway home from work on a Friday afternoon, of staying out late with friends at a new bar in the neighborhood, knowing full well that in the process you're walking past a couple of Mac the Knives without being any the wiser. This type of vigilant nonchalance feels more relevant now than ever given the onslaught of information we face at all times. We may not put ourselves at risk of walking past a completely unhinged unhinged sociopath as often anymore, what with all our food delivery apps and work from home jobs and the like. But chances are we do see their lifeless pre-recorded eyes on our screens once every few minutes. So sure, stay alert, stay intense, stay prepared. But while tensions are high, I'm sure you can find a way to redirect that energy towards a mood of your choosing, by grabbing hold of the hostility in the air and assigning it a productive role to play in our own lives. One every bit as whimsical as the licks on Saxophone Colossus, we reclaim our ability to feel joy and face the world with eyes full of life.